Okay, today's lesson is going to be more about details and shading on the face. So I'm going to show each individual component one by one, and then I'll put it together in one of the previous face examples I did. Students generally like to start with the eyes because it's kind of a fun thing to do. So I'm going to enlarge this a little bit so people can see. But regardless of the eye shape, and I'm going to draw fairly large here. Once you have the eye shape as well as the shape of the iris and the placement of the pupil, you can start selecting the kind of eyelid you want to have here. And generally, as a rule of thumb, we all know that the pupil is black. Sometimes we can have a reflective spot in it. So whether that existed in the pupil itself or in the iris or crossing both, I'm going to show crossing both. So I'm going to show a little circle here that I'm going to erase out the center. And essentially, I'm going to leave that blank. So I'll color in the pupil black, being mindful to go around that space for the white of the shine. When I get to the actual iris itself, because the iris is a muscle, you have a tendency to see a series of lines emanating from the center, almost like bike spokes. You can decide to put them all in. Level of density is up to you, but the general rule of thumb is that the top of the iris would appear darker than the bottom of the iris, not because the pigment's any darker, but because of the shadow implied by the eyelid. So for an example, if I start shading the iris, regardless of color, I will make it darker at the top, and as I go towards the bottom of the eye, things will lighten out some. I will tend to hug the edge more, the edge of the iris, that is. And that alone implies a greater deal of detail and some volume as well. You can certainly leave that white. If I need to, I can actually even put in an additional white dot, a lighter spot inside the eye, in this case inside the pupil. The rest of the shading of the eye, generally you want to leave most of this white, but you do want to have a little bit of shading near the top of the white of the eye, so it looks more like a hard-boiled egg. It has that kind of cylindrical feel, spherical feel, as opposed to having a car headlight embedded inside the skull. When you look at the surrounding area of the eyelid, because the eyelid tends to swell out towards the center and then recede, you may see some shadows near the corner of the eye. It'll get lighter as you go towards the center of the eyelid and then recede back into some degree of shadow on the other side. If you see a significant amount of skin above that eyelid illusion, you may see some shadow gently put in above it to imply the hollowness of the optic cavity. If you do things like eyelashes, the tendency for students to want to do is they want to put eyelashes everywhere. And it tends to look more like some sort of bacterial organism that you see underneath a microscope. So what I tend to do is if I start from the center and I'll start placing these eyelashes in with a gentle curve and work my way towards the edge, that looks a little bit more credible. The tear duct might be over here, and then the nose and the other eye would be on the other side. So I'll do that for the top eyelid as well. Work my way off to the edge. And you'll see that's starting to look more like a credible eye as opposed to what you see at the bottom here. Another detail thing that I like to demonstrate is the nose, and I'll move to another sheet. In the previous lesson, we talked about the nose looking kind of like a lawn nose. But to be more precise, it's very much a cone with 3 spheres attached to it. So when I showed it yesterday, there was the spine of the nose, the body of the nose, like an upside-down ice cream cone. And you can see the corners of that ice cream cone, which I'm going to fill with a circle. Again, making sure I touch those corners. And then adding other spheres here as well. And that gives me the basic body of the nose. And what I also showed yesterday as a quick review is erasing the top of that triangle, because that's not actually even really there. That leads up to the swelling of the bridge of the nose. And then I can kind of connect these shapes as if I was connecting them, wrapping them in cellophane. So I'm kind of skinning them. And then it's up to me how much nostril I want to show or not show. And if I get rid of the lines on the inside I don't need, you can see the general nose here. If I'm to apply shadow here, again, shadows are to imply volume and where the light is. what you're seeing right now is I'm implying it for the eye and as well as the nose, that it's general overhead lighting slightly from the front, not from either side and not from behind. With that assumption, if I want to show this cone, I will generally leave the nose itself alone, and I'll start shading along the sides of the nose. And here it's the placement of either cheek, so I will start a little bit dark at the nose, and I'll fade lighter and lighter as I go towards the center of the cheek. That effect will imply that this part of skin where the nose is rising up and then receding again. If I keep in mind that these the nostril walls as well as the tip here are they're spheres of cartilage, I can shade them appropriately as if I would shade a sphere. I will shade the bottom part of the centerpiece of cartilage, which is the tip of the nose. I will shade the bottom parts of each sphere that are designed to show the nostril walls. And then if I see any of the nostril itself, I might darken that up as well. Because this is a three-dimensional cylinder sticking out from the surface of the face, you will tend to see some shadow underneath the nose, like so. And I'm going pretty quick, so I'm doing kind of a perfunctory job here, just to give you a rough illusion. And since we're in this position here, I might as well start showing you the mouth here, because once I show you my mouth shape that I've selected, and here I'm going for like that McDonald's M with another McDonald's M with a upside down rainbow shape. That space between the nose and the mouth is important, because that's where we're going to have this general trench here to show, again, some shadow underneath the nose, but that little divot that exists below the nose but above the lips. When you shade the lips, regardless of skin color, the lips are always darker than what the skin is. So I will set up a rough tone for the lips. And again, I'm doing this kind of fast, so the texture is not a big deal right now. I can always eliminate that later. But the top lip is always darker than the bottom lip, in part because of pigment, but also in part because the top lip is actually angled down and not receiving as much light as the bottom lip, which is receiving more direct light. As an example, on the bottom lip, because of that direct overhead lighting, you have a tendency to see additional shadow on the bottom of the bottom lip. And I can press harder and then gradually get lighter as I work my way up that lip to show the volume. And if I want to complete the illusion a little bit nicer, I will take an eraser and I'll erase out some shine on the top of the bottom lip. And those are some general rules there. If I give you an example of an ear, and I'm going to grab another piece of paper here. If you were to see the ear at all, in some cases, the ear is so pressed up against the side of the head, you may not see the details. But I'm going to enlarge this somewhat so you can kind of see. The quick review is that shape of the ear. Here I'm doing a dangling earlobe. Whatever the top contour is, I will do the same thing below for that ridge of cartilage. I will show another piece of cartilage that looks kind of like a speed bump. And then I will also show that bubble letter Y existed in the wrinkles of the ear to kind of imply those ripples you see inside the ear. If I were shading, I would shade around that eye, the Y that is. The earlobe tends to stay in light, so I can just fade this out. If I want to make some of these lines longer, that's, again, a variation that individuals have, and you can show that. And that's a very simple, very quick version of shading the ear. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some of this to one of the previous faces that it started. And I'm going to apply it to this face. And I'll draw in some quick facial features. Again, I'll try to be mindful of the eye space in between the two eyes. I'll show some eyelid. I'm not too happy with this nose placement, so I'm going to adjust it a little bit. Bring it a little lower. Here's a rough shape of a nose, getting some general idea to the shape. And then I'll put in some lips here for mouth placement. And now I'm kind of ready to start. I'm going to switch pencils real quick. There's my irises. Here are the pupils. And what I can start doing now is darken the pupils, and I may leave a white spot to imply the shine inside the pupil. The shine due to the moisture inside the eye. I will make the dark parts of, the top parts of the iris dark, and I'll get them lighter as they go towards the bottom of the iris. They can even fade to white. I might see some shading on the corners of the eyelids to imply that the eyelid, again, bows out in space. I can start now adding some eyelashes. And again, I'm going from the center of the eye towards the corner of the eye. Again, if I want to start shading the nose, I will shade around the nose. I'm not shading in the nose as much as shading around this. And I'll fade that into the surrounding area of the cheek. Again, I can maybe define the bottom of the nose more where I can see some degree of nostril hole, but not maybe all of it. I might want to start cleaning up some of my lines with the eraser, which I'll do that right now. And you might start seeing that this illusion is getting a little bit more complete. Again, I will now show a little bit of what the bridge of the nose that I was talking about and how that kind of curves up towards the eyebrows, which I'll show in a bit. Again, shading of that little trench underneath the nose, as well as shading in both lips, keeping in mind that the top lip is going to be darker than the bottom lip. And I might shade the bottom of the bottom lip a little bit darker and get lighter as I go up. And then carefully wipe out a highlight on the top of the bottom lip to imply a shine there. If I were to go in this case, it happens to be that the ears are covered by the long hair. So I'm going to go to eyebrows, and I'll pick an eyebrow shape that I think is fitting for the face I'm drawing. And you'll notice I'm not drawing it very dark. I'm drawing the shape of the eyebrow. And what I'm going to do is, instead of filling it in dark, which, by the way, would make it look like someone took black paint and wiped it on the forehead, I will simply texturize and draw each individual eyebrow hair roughly in the shape of the eyebrow that I just drew. So I don't have to do a sharp outline around the whole thing, because that'll make it look pretty artificial. If we talk about additional shadows, probably the most important one is actually not on the face. It's actually below the jawline onto the neck. That shadow is important because it now starts showing that the face is coming closer to the viewer than the neck, and it now shows the shadow cast from the face onto the neck. So you see a little bit of separation there, and you can see now how the face is getting a little bit more forward prominent. Again, with the assumption that I'm doing top front lighting, I might show some gentle shadows on the edges of the face and fading as I go towards the center. I don't have to go very far. I will take the thickness of the shadow and taper it as I go towards the chin. And I'll do so on the same other side as well. The edge might be, maybe not be super dark, but it certainly tapers as you go towards the chin. And I will show a shadow between the lips and the chin. That rough egg shape of the chin will have shadow above it. I can also now start showing some shading above the eyelids and where would be the optic cavity. And I might see, in this case, because of the hair so long, I might see some shadows cast from the hair on the face, like so. And of course, I can make this look nicer if I need to, but that's the general rough idea behind shading here. If the person had darker skin, I could certainly make the shadows come in dark further, and I could make sure that I keep some highlights. So we're going to assume Caucasian here. I'm going to go to someone of African descent, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start toning in more of the skin. And the gray now, instead of serving as simply as a shadow, it's going to serve as pigmentation in the skin. But what that does mean is that I'll need darker areas for the shadow, so we'll be able to tell where there's a shadowed pigment as opposed to just a pigment exposed by light. So I'll do that for the other cheek as well. And again, I would encourage you to go smoother than I am, but I'm doing this quickly for sake of demonstration. The face gets overall gray, and in the process, it loses some believability simply because we've lost highlights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the medium tone, which is the skin tone, the darker tones, which are the shadows, and then I'm going to actually go back in with my eraser, and I'm going to peel out the highlights again. I'm going to make some areas where I think there's going to be some highlights, like in the cheek here. And it's almost like an upside-down rounded triangle, and I'll do the same thing on the other cheek. Another spot that's pretty common for highlights is the spine of the nose, which I happen to have light already, and the tip of the nose. I'll also get some of the chin, because that sticks out farther and catches light. And then also the forehead. In this case, the forehead's partially blocked by hair, but I might see some shadow on that forehead, highlight on that forehead. And you might see the implication of a light skin tone there, and how dark I decide to go is up to me. In this case, I would also darken up more of the neck and the shoulders. Actually, those are not the shoulders. Those are truly called the trapezius muscles, which are actually muscles in the back that are big enough to be seen from the front. And then some of the things you're seeing me do here is to define where the carotid arteries are that carry blood to the brain, and where the trachea is. Trachea is where you're going to be doing some breathing, where you would actually do a tracheotomy if someone had an obstruction in their breathing. But that's a quick example of shading here, and that'll be a nice review for some of you.